Hello, everybody. Welcome to Just a Little Salt, episode 4. I got a very special guest today. We got Kevin Hazzard, author, paramedic, and a lot of other things. So I'll let him introduce himself, tell him a little bit about himself and what he's got going on.
Hey, what's going on? Yeah, Kevin Hazzard. Was a medic here in Atlanta for about 10 years. Turned that experience into Thousand Naked Strangers, which is sort of like my way of unburdening myself from the craziness. And then that project sort of birthed American Sirens, which was about Freedom House medics. Um, and it just sort of led to a bunch of other weird opportunities, some movie and TV stuff, and some other things in medicine. So it's been an adventure.
That's awesome. I want to start this off by saying I didn't pick up your book until a few weeks ago. I'm sorry. Uh, I've wrote a few books myself, and unfortunately, I've had a bunch of people approach me and say, "Have you read so and so?" And I'm like, no, I don't do a good job reading other people's work, so I'm trying to work on that. Your book, I've heard since I was in EMT class many, many years ago. I've heard many good things about it. Matter of fact, when I go on Amazon to look at my own book, people under it says what else they purchased. It's your book always right next to it. So like I said, I bought it a few weeks ago. I'm about halfway through, and it's impressive, man. You know, the thoughts and everything you convey, especially in the beginning, you talked about being alone in that room with that woman that passed away. You know, when you first started, uh, that really resonated with me. So. A lot of people watching right now are probably new in EMS, 18, 19 years old. What would be your best advice to someone new that has to experience things like that they're not used to?
I mean, it is weird because most people, most of us are really young when we come into it.
Mhm.
I mean, think about that for a second. Like when I talk to people about that now, I'm always like, imagine you're 23 years old and you're watching some of these last moments. And these are kind of heavy things, and it comes at comes at us so young. We don't know much about the outside world, and then suddenly we're having to deal with like really important stuff about life and death. So I just understand that is the reality. That you are going to be very uncomfortable, even if you're not, like emotionally, like looking the way people do on television. There's like one of the things that drives me crazy about all these medical shows is how distraught everybody looks. That's just not how we feel. Like you're doing a job. If you're distraught, it's probably because you screwed up. You know what I mean? Like that's what I'd be distraught over is like, damn, you know, I didn't do as well in that moment as I should have. But you're gonna feel nervous, you're gonna feel out of your depth, and these are all like totally normal and expected things. It's how everybody feels when you first get into it. The first few times that you see these things happen, there's a lot of doubt. And the reason I wanted to start with that story was like I thought it in so many ways encapsulated at least my experience, which was this sense of like I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing. I have a ton of doubt. I'm very nervous. I think this woman just died, but I'm not really certain because like who am I to make that decision? And just again like the doubt and the just a sense of uncertainty and the like the vulnerability that comes from being in those moments. I just like they make a lot of people feel really bad about themselves when they start the job. Like you go home and you're like, damn, how am I ever going to do this? And then, but just understand like that's just the way it's going to be. Like, and it doesn't make you a bad provider. It doesn't mean you're unsuited for the job. It just like, that's how you break in, man. That's how you break in.
No, absolutely, I agree. The I had it written down. What year did you start in EMS?
Oh, three.
Oh three, oh three. Wow. So you've been doing it a while. What do you think drew you into doing that job?
um, you know, 9/11 happens and a lot of people were sort of looking around for a lot of people change careers after that, like change everybody's lives. It's difficult now for younger people to understand just how, like, my grandparents used to talk about, you know, Pearl Harbor, and I'd be like, like I understood it was important, but it wasn't my moment. It was their moment. My parents talked about the assassination of John Kennedy. I understood the importance, but again, their moment, not mine. 9/11, like I was there. I remember the whole, like it changed everything instantly, and so a lot of people were kind of like, all right, well, in a world in which we've been attacked, and the country feels the way it does, and we're all trying to pull together, like, what can I do to be part of this new, larger, hopefully improved whole? And I wasn't certain, but I was trying to find something. And then I was working as a city reporter for a newspaper. I get called one night to this tunnel collapse, and I'm standing over the tunnel, like covering the what started out as a rescue, but very quickly became clear it was just going to be a body recovery. And the families of these guys are showing up. These are just like construction workers. Their families are showing up, and I'm seeing them. And again, like, to get back to that story we were just talking about, like, I was really young, and I'm in the midst of like this huge moment for these people, this horrible moment, for which I'm not equipped. And then the high angle technical rescue team shows up, and just the way they carried themselves, the surety with which they entered that situation. Like, how that is. I mean, you've been doing this job. Like, there's a difference between someone who's been around for a while and someone who's brand new. And you just have a confidence that comes from knowing, like, yes, I've done this before. Yes, I will do it again. And when it happens, like, I'll be ready, and I'll give these people what they should be getting in that moment. And I couldn't put my finger on it then, but I certainly recognized that these guys had something, whatever it was. Like, I wanted that, and that was sort of my moment. I was like, all right, so this is what I'll do. So I just quit my job in the newspaper and went to EMT school.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I got my medic when I was 24 years old. I cannot stress to young people, you'll never be prepared for what you're going to witness, what you're going to be responsible. Me as a young kid, being responsible for a scene, traumatic scenes, people's lives truly in your hand. It's something you can't prepare for. It's something you just have to be a part of, witness, and make the best decisions as you can. And it does get easier, but that just be like you said, being that young person and having to make those decisions. It's truly something that's unexplainable, really.
Yeah, yeah. Until you're in it, until you're in those moments, which they never feel real when they're happening. It's like people would ask me all the time, like, "What's it like?" And I'm like, "I don't know. It's kind of like watching a movie." You're walking. I can remember early in my career as a dude cleaning his shotgun, shot himself in the upper thigh, which it's like, talk about like just bad news, and so I'm in a rush because all I just see is like a lot of blood, and he's turning. He was a black guy, and he's turning gray, like, in a hurry. And I was like, well, this is not good. So I rush forward, and I'm kind of like, I'm seeing pools of blood, I'm seeing shotgun, and then there's a crunch under my boot, and it's, of course, the crunch of the shotgun shell. And the cops are freaking because they don't yet know that, or like, it hasn't yet been confirmed that this is truly an accident, that this wasn't his wife or his brother fighting with him. And they were horrified that I had stomped into their scene and crunched the shotgun shell and obliterated evidence. And my partner was like, very wisely and tactfully, but also quickly making his way to the patient without destroying, whatever evidence was there. And I kind of, I was like, oh, you're watching this thing happen, but you also have to sort of remember you are a participant. But it does feel like you're part of the audience. It's really weird. It's kind of
Yes.
surreal is the only way to, somebody's insides are on the outside. It's a weird moment.
Yeah. Um, you talked about your partner. I'm sure you've had many throughout your career. Were there any partners or mentors that really stuck out to you in your early career that left a lasting impression?
Oh God, yeah, man. You're lucky enough if you get people who want to do the job working next to you. Not everybody's like that. EMS is it public safety in general? It's a tough job. It's not the world's most well-paying job. Hours are difficult. The job itself is difficult. It's tough on people's lives, their marriages. Um, and so you make the guy sitting next to you, the woman sitting next to you, may be really unhappy to be there, and that's an unfortunate experience. But if you're lucky enough to have someone who wants to be there, but then on top of that, um, who's been around a while and is good at what they do, you can learn an incredible amount, and it can really help. It can either destroy you if you get the wrong one, and I've seen that happen. I've watched, people who just very quickly burn out, and I've seen the opposite. And I got lucky. I had the opposite. It was a guy who started in the early '90s, and knew a lot about the job and still loved it, and was really excited when he got a new partner. A lot of people don't necessarily love a brand new EMT, but he was good at it, and he knew, like, I don't really need help, like, I can do this job. I'm just going to teach this kid how to do it. But if he screws it up, I'll just push him aside and do it on my own, which, like, we all get to that point. I've worked codes and sort of looked over at my partner and been like, you're not terribly helpful, but I guess I don't
Yeah.
need much from you. And that's how I was. And, that guy in particular taught me a ton about what it is to be a medic, and, which goes so far beyond the lights and the sirens and the blood, and, like, the sort of the medicine. So much of it is quiet and really intensely personal between you and this person, you and this patient, because in no other form of medicine are you going to be crouching next to somebody, where their emergency happened, maybe in their house with their family, having conversations with their family, like, doctors don't do that. Nurses don't do that. EMS is really personal. And you've got to learn how to navigate that, and how to approach those people, and sort of block out some of the adrenaline and excitement that maybe people get in it for. But I mean, that's not going to be what keeps you there by any means.
Yeah. Early on in my career, there was a few different people I rode with and were my preceptors, and it was a night and day difference. There were some guys that you could tell truly cared about the job. That's who I learned the most from, and then I also learned what not to do, because I also rode with those burnout people that truly didn't care anymore, and it was a bad experience all around. I tell people all the time, one of my number one questions is, I'm a new EMT. What would you recommend, ways for me to learn? And of course, you're going to get that base knowledge in class, but I tell them try to gravitate towards those people, those older EMTs, older medics that truly care about the job, because that will make a night and day difference in your ability as a provider, just having that extra experience and extra things they will teach you that you didn't learn in the book. But and also at the same time, stay away from those people that are very clearly burnout and don't want to be there anymore.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, look, people are going to, they're going to die in your hands. It just happens. It's not, generally speaking, it's not your fault. But when you allow your, burned out partner to be like, nah, man, just grab the jump bag. We don't need the rest of that stuff. And then you walk in, and that patient arrests in front of you, and you don't have anything that you need to work that arrest, and they wind up dying. And I can tell you, like, that's going to stick with you. That's going to be there at the end of this shift, the end of this month, the end of this year. 10 years from now, you're going to be laying in bed, and some part of you is going to think, like, that guy, like, he might have died anyway, but he sure as hell wasn't helped by me. Like, I was not ready for him. And so those moments, and it's so hard, especially in the beginning, especially when you're young, to, like, really put all that into context. But I mean, I can tell you, as you mature and as you grow and as you become, fuller person, like, you're going to look back and be like, damn, that, like, that guy that that patient I had all those years ago, like, he was just the same, full human that I was. He had the same constellation of friends and family and concerns and hopes about him that I did. And, and maybe I was great in that moment. He died anyway, but maybe I wasn't. Maybe I wasn't doing everything I could have, and he's dead. And, like, the stakes of it, they're huge, and you can have such a huge impact whether they live or die. Man, that's honestly, like, that's inconsequential. The question is, like, what do you bring to the moment? Because there's only so much you can do. A dude's been shot in the face, like, maybe you save him, probably you don't. Massive heart attack, maybe you save him, maybe you don't. Stroke, same thing. But what do you bring to the moment? That's the thing that you can really change.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's another thing as a young brand new EMT. People aren't really sure of themselves, and they get paired up with those burnout paramedics. And you get those new EMTs that know the paramedics doing something wrong, and they don't want to try to correct them. And that's truly one of your responsibilities is as well as to call out that bullshit and tell the paramedic, say you're doing things wrong. That's not good patient care. And at the end of the day, who cares what that paramedic thinks about you? You're there for one thing, to help the patient, and maybe getting called out by a brand new EMT will help put their head on straight. Because I've witnessed that a bunch too. Those new guys call out the people that are clearly doing things wrong, and that's just one of your responsibilities as well, in my opinion. We're going to move on to. I know you talked about multiple runs in your book. Were there any that stuck out, that provided that lasting impact and that adrenaline dump that you experienced during these runs? How did you deal with it after those particularly rough shifts?
You know, I I think you gotta like, I don't know, like some people run or they do whatever. You gotta have somebody in your life that you can be able to talk to, even if it's not like, oh, let me tell you about this horrible thing I saw today. Even if it's just like sitting down, like I reached a point fairly early on that I didn't really talk that much. I didn't tell my wife all the stories, whatever. People like, I mean, they only want to hear so many of these stories, and eventually there's a similarity to them, and you kind of get bored of telling them. Um, but the constant is like, yeah, this was like a really horrible thing that kind of stuck with me, and now what am I supposed to do with this? Um, and I found it just as easy to talk about something that totally unrelated, but just like to kind of like relax yourself and get yourself off of it. It's like for me, it was never. Like, yes, patients who are on the brink, whether it's traumatic or medical, who are dangling, and those calls, like those are fun and those are crazy and your adrenaline gets up and all that. But I feel like those are fairly easy to bounce back from. To me, it was more like the family members that really like kind of stick with you, and I think about the kid who was shot, and he was, I mean, dead by the time we got there. He was completely, he was face down in the grass, and I rolled him over, and his brain just slid out onto the lawn, and I was like, oh shit, this is done. So I started backing up because now you realize like he's shot in the back of the head, his forehead's blown out. Like we're in the middle of a crime scene. We probably should stop trampling it. And God, I've trampled so many crime scenes in my life. The Fulton County ME hates me, no doubt. But uh, while we're standing there, like the father comes out, you know, um, and now you've got this other situation. There was, I had a high school kid. God, it's terrible. Hung himself on his front lawn, and we walk up and we're looking at him. We're like, it's not every day you see someone hanging from a tree, and it was just like, wow, like it was very intense, and it was spooky. So I'm talking to the cop about like, all right, well, what's the protocol for getting this kid down? Like, we shouldn't just leave him on this tree. And while we're doing that, trying to figure out like, what is the next step? The front door opens, and it hadn't occurred to me. It hadn't occurred to anybody. Like, hey, somebody home? And out walks the grandfather, who instantly knew what had happened. I guess the kid had been getting messed with by some other kids, and just like finally had enough. And that's where it ended for him. And those, to me, like that stuff, like that sticks with you because now you're really like, hip deep in like the emotions of it, of this thing, and you're removed for just a moment from the medicine because you get a patient hit by a car. It's a crazy thing, their body's broken in all these places and multiple organ systems are shutting down on you, and their respiratory systems, careening toward the end, and their heart rate's at like 180, and you're just like, man, this can't last forever. And it's fast and it's crazy. And, the back of the ambulance is a big mess, and that's fun. That's part of what you get into it for. But those moments where you see the other side of it and you see what effect that this moment is going to have on other people, like to me, that's oof, those are the ones that leave a dent.
Yeah, that's and that's something they really don't train you on much. I found out quickly, having being a young kid going having to tell a family member, "Hey, your family member's dead," dealing with that trauma and how families react, and obviously it's one of the worst days of their life. But you just feel out of place there, and it's hard to find the right words to tell them in that moment, but you're the one that's responsible for relaying that information. So it's just something you have to get better over time.
Yeah, I mean, you just got to like embrace it. Like you feel out of place, but you're not. They called you for help and you've shown up. That's one of the weird things that like we all have to wrap our heads around early on is to the public, you are the expert. Like you are the professional. Um, none of us love this term, but like you are the lifesaver that was called in to save a life. However, it's going to shake out. They That's how they view you. And so when you walk up to them and say like, hey, like, I'm really sorry, but your grandfather's dead. As awkward as that might feel in the moment, that's what they're expecting of you. They're expecting you to give them this information, and I don't know if embrace is the right word, but just like accept your role and not feel self-conscious about your role. Because that is, that is your role in a moment to sit down and talk to these people. One of the things that I've never forgotten, it's a guy we picked up all the time, total jerk every time you picked him up. And normally like you get that sort of paramedic skin where people say things to you or do things. Someone takes a swing at you at work, you do not react the way you would react if you're just walking down the street and a dude took a swing at you. You know what I mean? Like somehow it just sort of rolls off you. It just comes with the job. I guess in the same way that seeing blood and dead people roll off you when they happen at the job versus like if you were, at Wendy's and some dude died, it would probably be a vastly different experience. But I'm in the back of the ambulance. He says something, makes his usual, comment to me. And for some reason that day it just hit me and I got angry and I snapped back at him. And we kind of like go at it for a second, two of us sort of like snapping at each other. And all of a sudden I realized like, oh, you better like rein it in, dude. What are you doing? And so I just said to him, again, like I should just let it go. But I was like, you called us, man. Like I didn't want to be here. It's raining. It's a Tuesday. I'm like in some like side street. I'm all wet now. Like I didn't want to be here. There's no reason to be rude to me. And he just stopped for a moment and kind of just like settled with it. And you could sort of feel like it came loose at the joints. You know what I mean? The realization of it all and just the acceptance of his situation sort of settled in on him. And um, he goes, I've got AIDS and my friends left and my family left and because they don't want to be around it. They don't want to be around me. And I'm going to die alone. And I know that. And it puts, and I'm scared and I'm angry. I'm like 25 years old. I'm sitting here like this man has just laid something very heavy and very real on me. And 2 seconds before I was, being sort of the snarky medic. And now like I am in the middle of this real emotional moment with a guy who just, probably almost accidentally unburdened himself. But, you hear that phrase like, be kind. You don't know what people are going through. Like that was me in that moment of realizing like, wow, this guy, like I've never been through anything like this, God forbid I ever do. Hopefully I never will. What a horrible, like, how do you cope with that? Probably exactly the way he's coping with it. And that was a real eye opener for me to begin, like changing the way I approach people, approach the job, approach patients, approach myself, because it is often way bigger than you can imagine for a lot of these people.
Yeah, something I talk about constantly is showing compassion to all of our patients. Something I struggle with and work on every day, trying to be a better provider. Because everybody knows we have these frequent flyers we run on, multiple times a shift. Sometimes ranging from having a tummy ache to wanting a turkey sandwich from the hospital, and it gets hard. But something that put something in perspective for me was my grandfather turned into a frequent flyer. Later on in life, he had cancer, diabetic, obesity, and he would fall a lot. And there got to a point where me and my dad couldn't lift him up, so we had to call EMS, every day. And we hated doing that because me and my dad, we did that for a living. We knew what they felt. And 30-year medic walked through the door. He'd been a medic longer than I had been alive, and just how he treated my grandfather, even though he'd been there multiple times that week, and it was the middle of the night. Uh, you know, he didn't know everything my grandfather had done prior to that, what type of person he was. He didn't care. He just came and did his job and treated my grandfather like a person. And that really put things in perspective for me because like you said, you don't know what somebody's been through in life, and it's not my place to judge. So that's something I struggle with every day, and I try to be a better person because you get caught up in that mentality, that burnout, salty paramedic, and it's just something I try to do better. Real quick, are there any good calls that stick out in your head that really resonate with you, throughout your career, and why?
I mean, depends on how you want to rate good. Um, I think I've had some of the ones that stand out most are respiratory calls. Because um, these are patients who are dying when you get there. Bad asthmatic, um, even allergic reaction. I had a guy who's allergic to bees. He rolled his lawnmower over a bee's nest. They all come out, boom, they all sting him. He was way off, far part of town. So it took us forever to get there in an area that we don't usually go to. So like nobody, we did not know it. Long driveway, get down there, get out. And he's sitting on a chair in the kitchen. His wife is there, his daughter's there. He's probably in his mid 50s. So like, he's like a young guy. And he's having a severe, severe allergic reaction. Like he has like sort of brown foam coming out of his mouth. And he's that fish belly white, and you can just hear the last squeaks of the gasping, and just the sweat, and just like you can see those bulging like scared eyes, like dear God, do not let me die, which is usually like somebody says don't let me die, like dude, they're gonna die, and you're gonna be the one to let them, like that's just how that's gonna work for you. And he had that look on his face of like don't let me die look. And we just sort of jumped. It was like one of those moments where it was like epi and steroids and mag and albuterol, and it was just flying. And by the time we were pulling out of the driveway, he was like, do I need to go to the hospital? And I was like, brother, you were almost dead 10 minutes ago. So yeah, like I get it how you're feeling at the moment, but yeah. um, those things stick out with me. Those respiratory calls, I really enjoyed them because you could take someone from, and sometimes you didn't, sometimes they just worsened, and those are terrible. Um, but you take someone from the very edge and you bring them back. Um, like, occasionally you might have a witness arrest, that are in your ambulance with a chest pain, and you shock them, and pow, you just see it go from, this big old ugly looking EKG to all of a sudden it kind of comes back to normal, and there they are looking at you. Like those are cool moments. And those are always, I don't know, to me, those kind of calls were always a lot of fun because you had an opportunity to to actually do what it was that you had signed on to do, which was to show up in the middle of emergency and to do something great. And it was, you know, again, getting back to what I said earlier, like they're going to live or die. Oftentimes that's neither here nor there, because there's only so much you can do to affect it. But when it works well and you are clicking and it's all happening really fast and it's all happening the way it should, it's just a great feeling, because you do, like, that is always in the back of your mind, that like that terrible call that one day you're going to get where just things, like everything falls apart, and that happens, like from equipment failure to difficult locations to just like it, you're just not at your best in that moment. Like those days happen. And when they don't, when everything goes right, it's a wonderful feeling. And sometimes too, just like, there's a guy that I worked with off and on for years. He was PRN and he used to pick up a lot of my shifts. And we had this call one day, and it was just for this drunk dude who was angry and just wanted to fight. And we get him into our ambulance. And he decides, of course, like as he's in the stretcher, like, this is it, time to fight. And I'm sure people walking by were like, what is happening? Because the ambulance is rocking back and forth, as the three of us are like rolling around and tumbling, and it's hot, and we're sweaty, and like our shirts are all pulled around, and, we're like scratched. And we finally get him down and tied up. And there's this moment. I'm on one side of the stretcher and he's on the other. And I've just tied the feet and he's tied the hands. And the guy's like Now that he's tied, he's had his fight. He's like, he's cool. You know what I mean? It's like two dogs getting a fight, and once they determine who the boss is, and everybody's cool. Once the fight was over with, the guy like totally just settled down. He went to sleep. And in that moment when we first tied him down, I look up and Lenny, the guy I was working with, Lenny and I, we just sort of lock eyes. And there's this moment of like, it's exhaustion. It's, are you fucking kidding me? It's also like, you're laughing because like, where else is this going to happen? And it's, then there's like this part of it that's just like, it's just you two, you and this guy, you and this partner of yours have just gone through something that you can't ever really communicate to somebody else who hasn't gone through it. But you got 10 years from now, you guys will see each other and you'll both laugh. And somewhere in that laugh and somewhere in that look will be that moment. You'll both be instantly transported to that instant that the two of you were looking over this dude going, what just happened? And that connection, that's something that is irreplaceable. There's a lot of stuff that when you leave the job, you leave behind. But the one thing that nobody warns you is like, you also leave the people behind. You leave those experiences behind and those connections, and those connections are hard to recreate.
Oh yeah. I can't tell you how many times retired guys come stop by the firehouse, and everybody will just take turns going through runs they experienced with that person, and fun memories. And it's like you said, leaving those behind is hard with people. So you've written a lot of books. I understand you have one coming out next year. I think
I do. Yeah. Yeah.
I saw that on Amazon for pre-order. So what pushed you into transitioning to this author role? I know you said you were a reporter at one time, but what started it all?
Um, so in 2010, I tore my ACL. I was skiing and I tore my ACL. So I'm like, I'm home. And they briefly had me working in the training department. But hospital was like, nah, we just kind of prefer that you use your FMLA, go away, which sucked because I used all my FMLA. But so I'm sitting at home and, you know, like, I don't know if you've ever tried sitting at home for a long period of time, but it is boring.
Hmm.
And I'm on the couch and you can't really do a whole lot because I don't know if you've ever had surgery, like second you get up and start moving, however you feel before, like you just swell up, like whatever you was operated on immediately bloats. So like every time I got up and walked around, my knee would swell up. So I was basically just sitting on the couch watching daytime television, which is murder. And so I had been writing since the very beginning. I'd been telling stories. Like my very first call, I came back, the first shift that I ever worked as or third wrote on as a student. Like I came back and like blow for blow, told my wife the whole thing. And, people love the funny stories. And so I was always telling funny stories. And then you reach a point where you're like in a bar with friends and somebody's like, dude. And they pull over some guy who they know, but you don't know. And they're like, tell them about that dude who was in the bus station, and then so you're telling these stories all the time. And then what happens is like you forget a detail that was important for somebody else. And they're like, whoa, wait. Don't forget that he was wearing shoe, and you're like, oh, that's right. So it becomes like their story and you hear them telling it and they're into it. And so I was like, all right, I'm beginning to forget some of these details. A lot of people are kind of chiming in with stuff that I had kind of forgotten through the years. And these are really funny things. I'm going to write them down. And so I created this blog, like, so they can, early days of blog existence. I was like, I'm just going to write one of these and just have it. And so when somebody wants to store the story, it's there. So I started sending, doing them. And then, my friends were all sort of subscribing to it. And, they were evidently getting emailed around, and I did not know this. People were sending them out. And so one day, a guy who I had not spoken to in years forwards me this email and was like, hey, man, been a long time. Came across this. Seems like your sense of humor. Thought you'd appreciate it. And so I scroll down, and it's, email is the new mail. You can sort of see where it's been. And I'm following this thing. It had literally been all over the world. Like it had been forwarded to someone with an Australian email, a Scottish email. It was crazy. And it was one of my own blog posts that people had sort of kicked around. And I realized in that moment, like two things. One, like from a very, like craven point of view, I was like, oh, there's maybe like a market for this. And then two, I realized like, oh, like these stories are bigger than just me entertaining my friends, that there's something in here that people respond to. And you've obviously noticed that. Um, that's a lot of what you do. I mean, you're like your stuff, whether it's Instagram or your books, like a lot of people are tuning in because like, you're bringing a specific point of view to these
Mhm.
stories. And that was the thing. In that moment, I was like, you know what? Why don't I turn this into a book? And what I didn't realize was going to happen, and maybe you've experienced the same thing, writing it forced me to put or to make sense of the whole thing. And I hadn't anticipated that. I just thought like I'm just going to write this thing. But at some point, as you're on the journey, you start to ask yourself, subconsciously or not, like, who is this person on page 210 that they weren't on page one? Because surely this has affected. And then you start to have to think about like, how did this affect me? How am I slightly different or largely different from when I started? And that was kind of, for me at least, the unexpected gift of it was an opportunity to put things, sort of wrap my head around a lot of stuff that had happened.
Yeah, like I don't think, which I don't call my first book successful. I mean, I self-published. Anybody can do that. The route you took, finding publishers, that's a lot more work that goes into it. Um, but for it to be successful, like our type of books, I believe that you have to. It's one thing to have the stories, but you also have to make them connect to people because that's the messages I receive a lot is people saying, "Hey, this run I really resonated with because, I experienced something similar or I felt the same way you did after this run." And you can't just tell stories. You have to like make them connect and, make them mean something at the end of the day.
Yeah. When I get messages from people all the time, letters, message, whatever, and it's never like, oh, like your collection of war stories were funny or whatever. It's like someone from some tiny town in the middle of nowhere who's like, look, I didn't work where you worked or how you worked or when you worked, but your story is my story. And I think if you can bring like who you are as a person into those moments, me talking about how scared I was my first few paramedic shifts and how, that self-doubt, and again, like the vulnerability, because that's the thing we all, that's really what we all, recognize in each other. And that's like, that is the common bond. I mean, even in these superhero movies, like somewhere in the heart of that superhero is some sort of weakness, is a vulnerability. And that is the thing that we all go to, because you can cover it up as much as you want, but it's there, And I mean, I've had some like big old tough looking, Midwest farm dudes come up to me, and I'm just like, oh boy, what's this guy got to say? Because they're kind of looking at me like they'd like to punch me, and they'll start telling me some story that they, that some way that they feel, and how they recognize something in my book that they were able to sort of point to their wife and say, like, I can't tell you how I feel, but this guy describing this moment, like that's how I feel. And that's a pretty wild experience. I got to tell you.
Oh yeah. So if there's people watching right now that want to go through the same process you did, that want to have, a published book, seek out publishers, try to get it approved. It's not overnight. Mine was an overnight thing. I self-published, so I uploaded my manuscript and I published it on Amazon service. It was not hard at all, but I can't imagine yours happened overnight. So what would be your best advice to people that want to go through that process, want to be truly published, get their piece of work out there?
So first, two things. One, people do want to hear these things. You do have something to say, whoever you are. I've had people say to me like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I can, I don't know if I'm a writer. I don't know if I have this, I don't read a lot of books, or I didn't go to college, or I didn't like whatever the self-doubt might be. You have a perspective, like whatever that perspective is, it's yours. And so one, know that. Two, know also that, I mean, walk into Barnes and Noble, man, go onto Amazon. There are a lot of books out there. So you have to like, what makes yours stand out? Like, that's what I would ask myself. Like, what makes you special? Like, and ask yourself that, like, in a unkind way. You know what I mean? Like, what the hell makes you special? And I think if you can answer that question, because somebody else is going to, the person on the other end of that approach, that pitch, that's what's going to be going through their mind. And for me, and I think for most people, and what you and I were just talking about, what makes you so special? is not whether or not you were there, 9/11 or some other, like, I was one of the first firefighters into World Trade Center. Like, that's an incredible story. That's an insane story, but you don't need that in order to tell something that people will lock onto. Um, what you need to do is tell your story and bring your, humanity, I guess, your vulnerabilities, your strengths, your sense of humor, um, into the moment. And if you can bring that out in the same way that when you're sitting down and you're telling a friend a story that means something to you, then you can resonate with people. The more they say, like, the more specific a story is, the wider its appeal, because if the more specific you get, the more personal you get. And we can all do that. So that would be, I mean, that's the first thing, honestly, is like to sit down and really determine who you are and what your story needs to be. And the second, super, super practical. You can't get a publisher without an agent. That's just like, publishers use agents as gatekeepers. So your thing is really less about getting a publisher than it is about getting an agent. And the way I went about it was, um, I went into bookstores. I went into every bookstore within driving distance, and I would walk to the memoir section. And any memoir that wasn't written by, like, you know, some super famous person, because I mean, their books are just going to get, if you're Al Pacino,
Hmm.
your book's just going to get published, whatever. But I picked up every memoir, and if you flip to the back in the acknowledgement section, almost everybody thanks their agent. And so I wrote this letter, and it basically was, hey, I recently read blank book written by blank writer, and I noticed that you represented it. I thought it was an incredible book, and I've written one that's similar to it. And since you represented that, I thought you might be interested in mine. And then I gave them, below that was like a two, maybe three sentence, because I understand these people don't have a lot of time.
Hmm.
2 to 3 sentences of, like, what this book is. Like, really imagine you have 20 seconds to explain to somebody why they shouldn't kill you. What would you say? You probably wouldn't start with, like, well, I've got red hair and I'm from Minnesota. Like, you'd be like, you get right to the point. Well, that's the thing. Like, you've got 30 seconds before this agent decides to kill you. How are you gonna, and your book is gonna be the thing that saves your life. So what are you gonna say about it? What is important about it that they know right now? And then I gave them, like, the first 3 pages, which, you should write them, and they should be really good. They should be as good as you can make them. Even if they're going to get better over time, whatever, they need to be really good before you send it out. So that's what I did. And so if you put a package like that together, and then I'm not kidding when I say I would sit there for an hour in the memoir section, go through every single book, and then every day I sent out 20 emails. Um, and I just did that every single day. And then eventually, after a couple of weeks, people started getting back to me. A couple, so I mean, you send out a few hundred and you get maybe a few responses, but it only takes one. And you just need to find that one person who goes, huh. And I can tell you, like, I get people who have written EMS memoirs all the time. They reach out to me and say, hey, will you write a blurb for my book? Um, like, they're getting published. There are plenty of them. Like, there's a market for it. There's a continuing market for it. People want unique perspectives on a world they're never going to see. It's why they watch The Pit. And you have a window on that, and you have an opportunity to do it. So, like, chase it down, go for it. It's there. The market is there.
Well, that is very interesting. I know you written for TV in the past as well. Is that correct? TV and film.
Hmm. Hmm.
If you were offered a chance for 1,000 Naked Strangers to be a TV or a movie or a documentary, what do you think it would be best as?
Man, I've been down this road so many times with strangers. Multiple different networks have bought it, and it's never seen the light of day. Um, it How this thing is not a television show, I've never fully understood. Um, like, Code 3 is very specific. It's a dude's last day. Like, I
Hmm.
understand why he wrote that as a movie. Like, that's a self-contained story. Um, and it's great. Like, good for, I'm really happy for him. He's a nice guy.
Yeah.
I'm really, really excited for that. And I think, we all should be. The more our stories get out, you can walk into any bookstore and there's like 75 books about Navy SEALs. Like, how many Navy SEAL books do you need? they have gotten their story out and they have permeated like the popular culture. Medics, firefighters, like I don't know that we're ever going to be Navy SEALs. Like that's a very specific thing that people are that it captures the imagination in a way. But so does ours. As anyone who has ever worked the job and has told someone at a bar, at a party, or whatever, oh, I'm a firefighter. Like you immediately like heads turn. I'm a forensic accountant, not quite so much. But yeah, I'm a paramedic. I'm a I'm a medical examiner tech, and I go out to scenes when people are killed. Like what? Oh, that's interesting. Like the more our story gets out, I think the more the public begins to go, oh, this is interesting. Like who are these guys? What are they? What are these people doing? But Strangers was about depicting the life, depicting what it feels like when you're new, what it feels like when you're good at what you're doing and you've been there for a while, but also what it feels like when you've burned out and you're kind of like, I think maybe I'm at the end of this journey. So to me, that is really more of a show than it is a movie, just because there's a lot to there's a lot of nuance to it that I think gets lost in 110 pages of a script.
Well, hopefully one day I get to see that show because it would be a good show. I think one day it'll happen. All right, this last segment of the show, they're just rapid fire, funny questions. We're just going to fire through a few. First off, coffee or energy drink on night shift?
Coffee, man.
Coffee.
Energy drinks give me PVCs.
Ah, that's fair. I've heard a lot of people say that. Most terrifying, angry patient's dog or angry patient's grandma?
Uh, oh, grandma. I've never had a problem with a dog on scene. Man, family members will get you. You got to watch out for a family member.
Yes.
They will get you.
They think they know what needs to be done with that patient, and if you steer from that, then they will get mad.
You're not doing it right. You're not doing it fast enough.
Yep. Favorite piece of gear you secretly hated using?
Traction splint. There is nothing worse. My anxiety level when a traction splint came out would go through the roof. There's so many ways it could fail. It is really difficult to use. It's just like you're turning this crazy crank. I've had the ankle hitch slip off and then like the bone ends. The patient is screaming in pain. I mean, fentanyl's a hell of a drug, but still, like a femur fracture is a nightmare. And then you got to like try to keep it steady while you're going, and then you get to the hospital, and the doctor's like, "Why did you do?" Like it's traction splint.
I gotta agree with you on that one. Who smells worse at 4 a.m., the patient or the crew?
Oh, the crew, man. A bad smelling patient is bad in the middle of the day when it's hot. That's when like you get the grungiest homeless dude at 3 a.m. Like he's mellowed out. Not the crew. Not the crew.
All right, last one. If you had to eat one ER vending machine snack for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oof, Chex Mix. Yeah. I could get down on some Chex Mix for a long time.
I agree with you. All right, Kevin Hazzard, thank you so much, sir, for coming on. You all make sure to go check out his new book next year, releasing. I believe it said pre-orders was up on Amazon. I don't know.
Could be. I haven't looked. I need to double check that. But yeah.
Check it out regardless. Check out all his books. Like I said, I'm halfway through Strangers right now. I'm looking forward to getting his other books. Thank you so much, sir, for coming on. Thank you, Jims, for making this podcast a reality. Y'all make sure to tune in every other Monday now, 7 a.m. Eastern for new episodes. And we'll see y'all on the next one.